Canadian conservative or liberal politicians generally think and act. The two parties are also supported by the sorts of Canadians that basically have attitudes similar to one side or the other. You know, the Liberal Party has a lot of support among, you know, like urban people, younger people, college-educated people. And then the Conservative Party, you know, you have more support in like the rural areas, the more religious areas, older folks. One big phenomenon of Canadian politics, however, is that the Conservative Party does put a lot of effort into trying to present itself as very moderate. There is a real thinking among the people that, you know, run the Conservative Party that Canadians will not elect a party that is too, like, rigidly right-wing, so there is a lot of effort to soften the edges a bit. So I can imagine you would get a lot of people that would say, no, the Conservative Party is very supportive of LGBT rights and climate change and this sort of thing. But I do think that, like, if you were to pull some random issue out of a hat and try to guess how the two parties would react to it, I think that if you looked at this chart here, you would probably have a pretty accurate sense of where the parties would fall. There are some issues, however, where the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party have the exact same position, and they would probably say so openly. A big one is abortion. Canada has very liberal abortion laws that basically allow women to have abortions whenever. Both the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party support this, although that position is very controversial on the Conservative side, among Conservative voters and even Conservative politicians. The other issue is Canada's public healthcare system, which is a very complicated topic I could do a whole other video about, but basically neither party wants to reform Canadian healthcare in any way. I know that there are a lot of Conservative supporters and politicians who, like, personally have a lot of problems with the way the Canadian public healthcare system works, but the issue is considered a bit of a political loser, so it's not really debated. I guess you could say that immigration sort of falls into this category too. Both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party tend to support very high levels of legal immigration, although I would say this is less of a philosophical issue and more of just kind of an effort to win the votes of immigrants. And again, there are immigration skeptics within the Conservative Party, even if they don't necessarily have a lot of influence. There is, in fact, a new immigrant skeptic party in Canada, formed by a breakaway faction of the Conservative Party. I made a whole other video about that. Okay, so that's the big two, but there is also a third party in Canada, the New Democratic Party of Canada, or NDP. This is a party that has been around since the 1930s, which makes it younger than the other two parties, which have been around forever. The current boss of the NDP is Mr. Jagmeet Singh, who is a big deal because, as you can see, he is the first non-white, non-Christian leader of a Canadian political party. A lot of Canadians would say that the NDP is a socialist party, although socialism has historically been a controversial idea in this country, so the NDP has preferred to use sort of softer terms like social democratic instead. But you know, now socialism is kind of cool again, so the NDP is starting to lean a little bit more into that label. In any case, the traditional thinking about the NDP is that they are like a far left party to the left of the Liberals. I don't know if that's really the most useful way of thinking about the party these days, because it is not really clear to me that the Liberal Party and the NDP actually disagree on that much. Like, I could easily swap out the Liberals for the NDP here, and I think that the basic philosophy would be exactly the same. These days, the NDP is really just the party for people who think that the Liberals are too phony, or corrupt, or incompetent, or whatever, but also don't want to vote Conservative. So it is basically just the party that criticizes the Liberals from the left, even if they wouldn't necessarily do things that much different if they were in power. And they never have been in power in all of Canadian history. There have only ever been Liberal and Conservative Prime Ministers in Canada. The NDP, in fact, has only ever once even come in second place in a Canadian election. Usually they are in a fairly distant third. The best way I can talk about the NDP is to just focus on the sort of Canadian that tends to vote for them. This would include parts of the country that are like more working class, or like very urban areas, or like college towns, or like areas that are very union dominated. The NDP is very close to organized labor, to the point where a lot of people would say that it is basically like a special interest party for Canada's big unions. I can give you a good contemporary example of this. So right now the Canadian Post Office is on strike, and Prime Minister Trudeau's government recently passed a law forcing the post office workers to go back to work. And the NDP members of Parliament very ostentatiously walked out of the chamber rather than vote on the legislation, because they are very firmly taking the side of the postal workers union in this dispute.
Instead of helping these workers, the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau has undermined their ability to have a free and fair negotiation. That's the opposite of what a government should do.
Okay, now let us make things a little bit more complicated. Every province of Canada has its own government, and the party systems at the provincial level can be a little bit different. Usually they all have a two-party plus system too, but it can sometimes seem a little bit random as to which of the two parties are the dominant ones. Where I live, here in British Columbia, for instance, the two dominant parties are the Liberals and the NDP, the Conservatives are kind of not really much of a factor. But then in, say, Manitoba, their two dominant parties are Conservative and NDP. And then in, like, Newfoundland, it's Conservative versus Liberal. And then in Quebec, everything's completely nuts, so let's not even bother to go there. Actually, no, let's say one thing about Quebec. In recent decades, a lot of Quebecers have chosen to opt out of the conventional Canadian National Party system in favor of voting for this Quebec separatist party called the Bloc Québécois, which I guess means the bloc of Quebecers. This has a lot to do with the Quebec nationalist separatist movement and the desire a lot of French Canadians have to opt out of Canadian institutions as much as possible. So voting for the Bloc Québécois instead of the Liberals or the Conservatives or the NDP is sort of an anti-Canada protest vote. At one time, the Bloc Québécois held quite a lot of seats in the Canadian Parliament, which was a testament to how strong the Quebec separatist movement was at one time. It's not so much the case these days. A lot of that also probably has to do with the retirement of Gilles Duceppe, who was the leader of the Bloc Québécois for something like 20 years. Since he wandered off, the party has had a lot of internal chaos, which is kind of a testament to how much Canadian political parties tend to be dominated by the guy at the top. And speaking of personality cult parties, I guess I should say something about the Green Party of Canada. Anybody who knows me knows that I am very skeptical of the Green Party of Canada, mostly because I consider it a real fringe party that does not deserve to be taken as seriously as a lot of folks in the Canadian media seem to. Basically, the Green Party has been around for a very long time, but only started being taken seriously as a significant force in Canadian politics in the early 2000s, when this woman, Elizabeth May, was chosen to be their leader. Elizabeth May is a very savvy and charismatic politician who has been very good at getting attention for herself and her party. I would never take that away from her. But she has also really turned the Green Party away from what it was founded to be, which was sort of a single issue party about the environment, and into this stranger sort of left-wing populist party that is very dominated by Elizabeth May's personal obsessions and conspiracy theories. So it's like a party with a lot of weird preoccupations about like alternative medicine and carcinogenics and who was really behind 9/11 and that sort of thing. The Green Party only ever wins like 3% of the vote and has only ever elected one member of parliament, Elizabeth May herself. But Elizabeth May likes to strut around declaring herself the equivalent of the Conservative or the Liberal leader, which I think is kind of sad, but the media plays along with. They even include her in prime ministerial candidate debates. They also include Gilles Duceppe of the Separatist Party as well. It's also a sort of questionable decision. Now, in fairness to the Green Party, it is starting to become a little bit more of a force at the provincial level. Until a few years ago, no Green Party person had ever been elected to a provincial legislature, but now there's a couple of them in a bunch of provinces. So the larger story of the Green Party is still very much being written. Okay, so yeah, that is basically the story of the Canadian political party system. If you have any questions about something I didn't address, or any comments about something you think I missed, please leave them in the comments below. And now it is reader mail time. Today's mail comes from my friend Ben, who is from New Zealand. He says, "I'm Ben, a resource and environmental planning student from Palmerston North, a university rural city of 80,000 people in the lower North Island of New Zealand." So Ben has sent me a couple of fun New Zealand things, beginning with these pineapple lumps. Chewy pineapple stuff covered in chocolate. They used to be made in a city called Dunedin, but unfortunately the Cadbury factory closed and forced the pineapple lumps to be made in Australia, much to the disgrace of everyone. I'm excited for pineapple lumps. Pineapple is my favorite fruit. That is really good. He has also sent me this thing, which is called a K-bar. This is a bar of flavored toffee, which is very popular with children, especially children after they play sports on a Saturday morning. And then he sent me these two golden chocolate bars. These are the iconic Kiwana Whittakers, including the peanut slab, which is an absolute classic. Gonna be tough to beat these pineapple chunks though. He got me these charming socks featuring the New Zealand flag, the of course controversial New Zealand flag that they tried to change a while back. Or I guess maybe it's not quite so controversial since they didn't change it. Oh, and here is just a flag itself. We of course have a Kiwi crossing magnet, a CD from our good friends from the Flight of the Conchords. I'm a very big fan of the Flight of the Conchords. I think they're so brilliant. And we have a tea towel featuring a pavlova. A pavlova is a very traditional dessert that they have in Australia and New Zealand. It is sort of a crisp meringue shell that they fill with all sorts of fruits. I've never actually had it myself, but there's this cafe I often go to that sell it, and I've often been tempted to try. And then lastly, Ben has got me a couple of very charming postcards depicting some of the natural beauty of his country, including this one here with a traditional Maori tiki.